Hello, I'm here with Damien O'Mahony. Damien is a planning consultant, has his own consultancy company for the last 10 years, served on the executive of Cork City Council, and has extensive knowledge in planning frameworks and redevelopment. Myself and Damien are very passionate about Cork City. We'd love to see it become a very vibrant city and we need to attract investors and make it a place people want to live. Damien, I suppose just as we kick off, we have spoken about SI75s, which are proven very successful in the city. So the S75 basically is, my understanding is, there's no planning permission, it's a notification to the local authority. It's a very quick process. So again, we mentioned in the previous interview, there's no Part 5 contributions. So again, this has been very successful, and Damien has looked after a number of these for ourselves and clients. Damien, can you just tell me a little bit about the successes of the SI75 and why it was extended, maybe?
Can I just start by saying something about Cork? I was lucky enough to interview Paul Murphy, the Minister for State for Northern Ireland under Tony Blair's government many years ago. And Paul's family originally came from Kilcrea, outside Ballincollig. And a number of generations on, Paul was born in Wales. And I asked Paul, as part of the interview, I said, Paul, were you aware of your Cork origins? Right. And Paul said that his grandmother used to say to him, Paul, you should never ask anybody if they're from Cork, because if they're from Cork, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
So you're quite correct. Anybody born and raised here is incredibly proud, and we get slagged over it. But it's a beautiful city, but like lots of older cities, quite a bit of dereliction. Older cities that are in need of a bit of tender loving care. And one of, I think, the really welcome initiatives dates back to 2018, where the government, through a statutory instrument, decided that they would allow the conversion of commercial premises to residential use, primarily in the upper floors of all the buildings, as long as they had been vacant for 2 years or more. That original statutory instrument was known as SI30 of 2018. It was such a success, it was extended in 2022, became SI75 of 2022, and that in itself was extended just last month by SI648 of 2025. And the closing date for that is the 31st of December 2028. Effectively, what it allows a developer or an owner of a property to do is to convert commercial units or parts of a building that were used as a store over a commercial unit, convert it to residential use without the need to apply for planning.
We've seen quite a number of licensed premises actually where the license are sold, and a lot of bars disused have been turned out back into homes, which creates vibrancy and gets rid of dereliction, and there's obviously an economic and social impact on that to bring people back living in city centre areas. They don't require transport, lifestyle, restaurants, as we said yesterday. You're not only buying a home, you're buying a lifestyle, you're buying a city centre living. With no commuting, etc.
And of course the use of public houses and the ground floor of public houses as residential accommodation was an evolution of the original statutory instrument in 2018. It changed in SI75 of 2022 to allow for the conversion of even ground floor public houses to residential use. Now, having said that, local authorities are reluctant to see the ground floor of commercial properties in commercial cores converted.
Damien, I know the local authority about commercial cores, but we've seen the evolution of retail. Retail has gone online. I think certainly areas like Patrick Street, Winter Street, Oliver Plunkett Street would be high retail space and high commercial activity areas. But the likes of North Main Street, you look at the closure of Cummins Sports, Dunn Stores pulled out of the street, it's asleep. I think they should redefine the areas. again, you could, from old frameworks when we were studying, there was CBD, Central Business District, there's obviously retail districts. I think they really need to look at maybe a more balanced approach than, I would call them second class or third class streets, but certainly where there's a main core, like the Patrick Streets, the Winthrop Streets, the Albert Plunkett Street, maybe that needs to be redefined and looked at. And maybe on the, I would call them maybe the second or third class streets, maybe there's an integration of where there's not a demand for retail. You can see there's a barber shop opening, there's another one opening, there's constant closures, and there's no sustainability of tenants. Where they should maybe they should do a 70-30 rule or 60-40, where there's more balanced approach, because what we're seeing is massive dereliction, deterioration of buildings. So is that something, am I wrong in some ways? Because I'm open to, obviously with your expertise, I'd value your opinion.
You're not really, the interesting thing about this is that Mary Portas, who became known as Mary Queen of Shops,
right,
was commissioned again by the Tony Blair government back in the 90s to do a report on the death of the high streets. And effectively what she was looking at was just what you've been describing, the growth of online shopping and the reduction in the viability of commercial units, physical commercial units in high streets. And as you point out, particularly in peripheral commercial areas. I think it's a reality. I don't think you're wrong in this, but I can see the local authorities doing what they can to prevent that happening. Because the moment that you abandon a commercial use in a particular street, it's not coming back, or very unlikely to come back. And commercial activity does draw people into an area. It does make it vibrant, particularly during the day. So I can understand the reluctance, but I think the reality of what you're describing, excuse me, is undeniable. And I think it will have to come to the stage where local authorities and planning authorities will have to acknowledge that what they would have described as the commercial core 20 years ago is no longer viable on the periphery as a commercial core, and then to find alternative uses for that. Now, we have seen lots of places that commercially would have sold, kind of convenience, clothing, food, or whatever, this kind of stuff, have morphed into hospitality. So the coffee shops have grown up, etc. But the vacancy that you describe has often been filled with charity shops, not that there's not a need for them, but maybe not as many, vape shops, and these kind of what you might imagine are temporary commercial uses.
I have a major problem though with, and it seems to be the vape shops, and we're obviously a historical city. We look at the signage on these beautiful buildings, neo signs, really nasty signage and historical buildings. It actually, when I walk around the city, and I take a walk for 15 or 20 minutes every day, and I'd be looking up at buildings and admiring the upper floors, and then I see these horrendous signs. Like I'm in a listed building ourselves, and we were very delicate about the signage. We actually did gold leaf lettering, traditional sign making, and I just think, look, I think that's something maybe the council needs to be stricter on, especially with these kind of temporary, I call them temporary shops. Is there a need for them? I don't think economically they do great things for the city, these types of shops. And again, your core areas, like you're never going to get Zara to move to Shannon Street, and that's classified as a commercial area, and there's other areas like that as well, like North Main Street is asleep. That's a student accommodation built there recently. I think that's positive. We need people, living, flowing down there. But I definitely think more of a balanced approach, and I do agree with you. Again, your approach, it certainly brings people to the area if there is, but certainly just saying a blanket no to mixed residential, where a lot of the time, I suppose, traditionally in the likes of Shannon Street was probably one of the most vibrant areas. If you go back in historical times, that was it was the pathway down. My father-in-law actually lived over the shop there and had a shop on the ground floor, and obviously he speaks about there was bakeries, there's sweet shops, ice cream shops. It was a very butchers. It was really vibrant, and people lived over, and there's a community feel there. Now I walk, like, we're redoing a building on Shannon Street. If you start at the bottom, it looks quite well, because obviously there's the funeral home, there's Murphy's Solicitors. Those buildings are well preserved. But as you go up, they become for such a street steeped in history, just a deterioration, and the vacancy is horrendous. So we need solutions, not.
We do. And I think a balanced approach, as you said, not all former commercial premises are suitable for the conversion to residential use. Some of them you might prefer not see happening, in that if you remove all of the commercial use, you might really reduce footfall in it. But I think anybody with overhead property that's unused, with the advantages now of the SI75 as extended by SI648, with the other incentives, the other financial incentives, the Living City initiative, with the regeneration grants and that, if you have the availability to do that kind of development, I think it would be, I'm not sure how long these pieces of legislation are going to extend to. For instance, the SI75 and its extension, it may finish on 31st of December in 2028. I think it would be, it's the ideal opportunity to avail of the advantages presented by these pieces of legislation, particularly the LCI.
But with the S75, like, obviously you have to comply with the current building and fire regulations as well, right? And in some cases you just don't have the square footages, but due to design, half landing. So I think there may be a bit more flexibility around. I know the S75 is good, but technically you have to comply with current guidelines of apartment rules, sizes, certain storage areas, size of bedrooms, living rooms. So I think more could be done with that, because you can only work within the confines of the walls and the footprint of certain buildings.
I agree, but I think the recent reduction in the size of the studio apartment by the government was an indication that they recognised the need to be more flexible in that. I'd also say, just in relation to fire regulations and that, any dealings that we have had with fire services, both in the city and the county, they've been extremely flexible, but their bottom line is, as it should be, the safety of the people who will occupy these premises. And while we have found them very flexible from time to time, where they have put their foot down and insisted, I think generally I could put my hand on my heart and say it was a line that nobody should cross. So look, I think they have a difficult job. I think they have demonstrated flexibility. I think local authorities themselves can be quite flexible when it comes to it, but some of the guidelines that are issued through departmental guidelines on apartment standards and that, their hands are tied, and perhaps for good reason. And issues like the dual aspect in these have been reduced again recently. Of course, the Sustainable Development and Compact guidelines that were issued in January of last year, again, were, I think, quite reasonable in the way they approached these things.
But if we just go back to the Living in City initiative, it's been around for quite a while, right? And I think it is the government is kind of now promoting it, right? It was always there. It hasn't been very successful. So basically what it means is you're building it to be pre-1916. They have a map which makes no sense, right? That you have to be within the map. So South Mall isn't in the map. George's Quay isn't in the map. North Main Street is parts of Pope's Quay, so you can fall short. So I think they're going off a historic or conservation architectural map, but it doesn't include all areas. Like, so I did a building in Grand Parade, it was excluded, right? And the government now have said, this is the best thing what has ever happened. We're bringing out the Living in City initiative and we're increasing it to 300 grand, right? Now, if it was 200 grand 10 years ago, and that's what it is, all they've dealt with is inflationary costs and labour and building materials. So they actually haven't improved the allowance at all. They've only dealt with inflationary measures, my own opinion. And if you're doing up a single unit, yes, 300 grand is magnificent if it's derelict. But if you're doing a multi-unit, as you mentioned a while ago, and I've actually find working with the fire department and our consultants very easy, right? If you're doing 5 or 6 apartments, you're double slabbing, you're doing a fire alarm system, you're putting in AOV, you're putting in your fire doors. It's fairly straightforward. It becomes more complicated as the higher you go up. They want sprinkler systems, and that adds costs. So at that time, you don't use an upper floor, but it's very workable. So like where you're doing one of those apartments and you're doing a full strip out in a difficult location, and you're scaffolding, you're roofing, you're taking all the joists out, you're spending 700 or 800 grand. So like the 300 grand is just insignificant. It's nowhere near the mark.
Look, again, going back to the discussion we had previously about Part 5 and a graduated approach, I think a graduated approach here would be very welcome, where somebody can demonstrate genuinely, and you're going to produce the receipts, that the expenditure, their capital expenditure, has exceeded 300,000. Then there should be, and you know, what does the government lose out of this? These tax allowances at the end of the day, if you increase it to 500,000,
100%. But it means a building getting done and not getting done. It means viability. It means like if the building is literally, in some cases, they're at a stage where they're end of life, you know, from a structural point of view, and like all you're doing is combating the costs, really, and making it viable. And we're bringing units in. We're converting existing buildings. It's like it makes so much sense.
Yeah, I've had this discussion with people in the department on a few occasions with similar schemes, right? And the response has been, and it's an interesting response, is we're not here to pay for it for you. We're here to incentivize you. That we're not going to cover everything that you do. We'd like to see you investing some money that you're not going to get back.
But Damien, I have to stop you there, right? So if I do the Living in City initiative, I have to commit to the rental market for 10 years. So I'm supplying units in at my own cost, not at 10% or not at, there's no profit margin. So I'm producing the units, I'm keeping the units. So there's no, like, it's no cost to the government. So by giving me some sort of a contribution for me to do up a building, to purchase and buy and do up that building, sure, it's an economic win for the government. There's no cost to the government. It's self-funded. They're not looking for, we're not looking for any help. We just want some sort of incentive for us to convert something what's not already a multi-unit into multi-unit, and we're producing new units into the market, which is going to reduce rents.
Yeah. Well, look, you're a coalface, right?
Yeah.
That's something that I don't deal with every day. And you're looking at people that are investing into these properties, and you're getting it from the horse's mouth, as it were, how challenging these incentives are, or how beneficial they are. And look, I have to bow to your knowledge on it. All I can say is I think 300 grand is pretty generous. But I do acknowledge that if you're doing stuff that's going to cost you $1 million, that 300 grand.
Well, if you're dealing with, again, a lot of these buildings could be listed. You're dealing with specialist contracting.
Conservation architects.
They might want, like, instead of getting a standard PVC window for 200 quid, you're getting one made. They want a tin transom bar. They want a certain type of glazing unit in it. So, like, the windows package could go from 15 to 80,000. Just on windows for front elevation, depending on what detail they want. It's specialist joinery, or if you're dealing with old cornices, Latin plaster ceilings, lime plaster. It's a different. It's not your standard construction.
But again, there are conservation grants for some of that work. I know they're not hugely beneficial. 10 grand for the smaller ones, but you can get larger ones for substantial works. I think in the current climate, could the government put a bit more value into these? I think absolutely, certainly. Will they? It's not a question entirely.
The one thing I would say is, like, the 9 units, the 6 units, it's small. It's small juice, really. It's not. It will make an impact. Like, you look at the derelict sites register at the moment, right? You look at the brownfield sites around the city centre, just not being activated at all. What I see over the last 20 years from walking the city is, I think the last private apartment block would have been Opera Lane, which had been developed by Owen O'Callaghan's. I think it was building Mahon Point maybe at the same time. And then Lancaster Gate would be another one. I still call it the old Jury's Hotel, the Rivoli Hotel it's called now. And and maybe the likes of Knapp Square, which was Section 23. Like all the new apartment schemes are included, or they're affordable housing, or it's an approved housing body buying it, which is they're probably the biggest buyer of units in the market at the moment, which is obviously driving costs.
Yeah.
So my question is, they had Section 23 in the past, which had its problems, certainly had its problems, because they were doing hotel schemes, and they were doing summer houses, hotel schemes, golf courses in the Midlands with a spa, and investors were just taking the reliefs, and it was just a tax avoidance scheme. But the framework is there for Section 23 and 27. And again, we can see, we spoke about examples of this. One was Salmon Weir, which was built in 94 by Kenny Group. And again, we still manage a lot of the units there today, and they're still in the rental market. And it was a massive success. But there seems to be a fear from the government that they don't want to make the rich richer. Like, the statistic is there's 175 billion in household funds. Again, if there was an incentive, and the incentive is for an investor to buy, or it could be an owner occupier. But what it means, it makes the apartment viable to build, because they can sell a 2-bed apartment at 500,000 if there's allowances attached. Like, I can go into the market the moment away a 2-bed second-hand apartment for somewhere between 265 and 300 grand. So, like, my question is, the piece of legislation is there, they could bring it out overnight, and they keep it strictly to city centre location. So Waterford City, Limerick City, Cork City Centre, obviously Dublin, and it's investor relief as well as tax relief for investors. Like, I don't think, and I said this before, I don't think the person working in Janssen, Apple Computers, down in City Quarter, cares if there's a 10 or 15 grand deduction against someone's income tax over 10 years if a high quality unit is supplied into the market. I don't think they care. They want somewhere to live. Like,
I agree. And one of the issues that had been raised by the multinationals in attracting good quality employees has been the dearth of decent accommodation for them. Places like Horgan's Quay and the apartment developments there sought to address that. Problem with the development of apartments, as you know, kind of culturally, historically, apartments were not seen as permanent accommodation for families. Certainly for individuals and couples, perhaps, but never seen as your long-term kind of home. And consequently, also the cost of developing apartments, as we mentioned earlier, the higher up you go, and sprinkler systems and all these kind of things, it's not for the faint-hearted.
It's not for the faint-hearted. And again, this is why, if you have to put in your sprinklers, you need to put in 4 lifts, cores, you're losing in your build cost, you're not just building the apartment, the common areas, you're losing another 20%.
Yeah.
So, like, my point is, if the incentive is brought, like, we have 700 customers. I know 700 of our customers. We would sell, if there's a tax-based scheme in the city tomorrow, we'd sell 1,000 units. And that would be just through our own network. That's before we reach out to accountants, tax advisors. So there's a real opportunity here and again, this is going to mobilise capital. It's going to, imagine if you brought, 5,000 or 6,000 people into the city centre. It's going to make it enormous. It's going to take pressure off transport. It's going to be, the cafes, the restaurants, the retail, everyone's going to win off it.
Well, we're seeing some of that at the moment in the South Docks, and that is going to have a dramatic impact. One of the things we haven't touched on, which is kind of tied into this idea, is the concept of modular homes, which there seems to be kind of resistance. Whereas if you look at the UK and look at mainland Europe, it's a standard way of swiftly delivering. Now in Europe, maybe not in Ireland, but at a reduced cost, definitely in the UK and in Europe, good quality housing. Particularly in the climate we're in at the moment with regard to housing, I think we should really be relooking at that. The technology is there, the capacity is there from the point of view of land and availability of land. I think it's something, certainly in the short term, that councils and local authorities should consider as a way of addressing the shortage of housing, particularly for first entrants into the market. But coming back to your point about the Section 23, there isn't any reason in my mind that it shouldn't be reintroduced with changes, as you describe, on a short-term basis. A 5-year period with a new, or the follow-up to Section 23 to see what it does to the market. And I think, yes, there will be accusations that you're putting money into the pockets of rich developers, but it has delivered in the past. And if you exclude the vanity projects, if you like, the golf courses and the hotels, right, 100%. And confine it exclusively to residential use, then I think it could produce results, yes.
Because we have a number of clients actually who still hold sites around the city, and there's like viability. There's no point in doing it with it. But it's like we have one particular client now who would build 100 units and keep the whole lot if there was some sort of incentive. And I know that's so, like, again, I know you have the people will say that, oh, sure, the rich are getting richer. But like the fact is, and I heard the stat recently, 2/3 of all income tax is paid by people who earn over 100,000 euros. That's the stat. So I think they pay their fair share of income. Probably people won't like that, but that's the reality. And if this means it creates homes, and again, calls that I get weekly, every week is, again, and you'll be familiar with working some clients as well as, I have a manager who's been given notice to his property. He's nowhere to go. He's my key worker. He does everything. I'll be lost without him. He can't get accommodation. Can you help? And most of the time, sometimes I can help, other times I can't. And again, this is down to supply. So any way we can supply units, whether it's tax relief, affordable schemes, there has to be, they need the approved housing body, they need the institutional investor, but they also need the existing, I don't like calling them landlord, I call them housing provider, because there's no cost to the state, right? That's why I like reframing that name. We need the housing provider landlord, who has 2 units, will bring it to 4 units. So anyone who's willing to produce a unit, and that's down to the builder, we spoke in the previous interview about stepping the Part 5, make it more affordable, give an incentive for a person to build 4 houses, 5 houses. We need the large scale, we need the Cairn homes, the large develops, the Glen phase. You know, we need all hands on deck, really. And I think just the Section 23 is a very small piece of it, but I think would do enormous benefits for a beautiful city.
I agree. All I can say about that is there's a lot more work to be done. But I think that the changes to the LCI, I think the extension of the SI75, I think the regeneration grants that are there at the moment, the conservation grants that are there, it's kind of tussock ma, that neighbour. I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot more to be done. Hopefully we'll be around to see it.
Damien, just in relation to the SI75, is there anything you change, or is there any way you fast track it, or is there any approach you take to, I suppose, increase the delivery of it and encourage people to take this on, because it's a fantastic framework?
Again, this is something that a colleague in the industry, Clara O'Neill, we've discussed, and Clara has suggested, and I agree with her wholeheartedly, the establishment of a one-stop shop in the local authorities, where somebody interested in developing under SI75 can go, get information on the SI75 process, get expert advice from the fire department on what the fire requirements are, talk to people in building control about the requirements from apartment sizes, etc., and dual aspect and all the other kind of issues that they should deal with, and talking to conservation people if the building is in an architectural conservation area or if it's a protected structure. Rather than going from pillar to post on these issues, having a single resource available. It could be done alternatively, rather than establishing the one-stop shop, if there was a bi-monthly public open forum where people could come in, and not that you have it available every day, but you know, on a regular basis, that you can come in and do these workshops, have a look at them, get help filling out your forms, etc., and the process explained to you. As you said in the previous discussion, Michael, the SI75 is notifying the local authority of your intention to carry out this work, which you believe is exempt.
Yes.
If you're ever selling that property after, you may have to get a Section 5 declaration of exemption from the local authority. But having that pre-discussion with the local authority will give you a great deal of comfort that you will obtain that certificate of exemption from the local authority if ever you decide to sell the property on. I think that it is a simple initiative, and I think it would really encourage people who have vacant properties in city centres, in particular like Cork and some of the towns around the county, definitely would incentivise them to get a move on and make some conversions.
From my conversations, even with some clients, and some of them are large building contractors and retrofitting companies, they don't even know that S75 exists. So I think there should be more public meetings about it, and they should be actually promoting it.
Advertising campaign.
Advertising, and I'd love to take that on, because we're doing a number of them and show them how it works. And I like, as you said, Damien, all boats rise. You know, I think there's a saying you said earlier. What was it again?
The rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah. Damien, thanks for coming in, and I'll keep walking the streets and updating your progress, and hopefully you'll keep working with us on conversion of residential units and commercial to residential units, and we'll go on that journey together, and we'll make the city a better and safer place. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers.